From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
Normally on a Sunday afternoon or a Sunday evening, I go and have a few beers at the Bondi Icebergs with some cops, retired cops and lawyers. Yeah, it was just normal, balmy Sunday in Bondi.
Mark Morri is a crime reporter. He's been a journalist for 45 years and he spent much of that time living near Bondi Beach in Sydney. For him, Sunday evenings are usually reserved for drinks with police contacts and friends. But this Sunday, he was at home when one of them rang.
Just before 7 o'clock, I got a phone call from a friend who's an ex-New South Wales policeman. And he said, mate, there are shots, I can hear them. These aren't firecrackers, these are guns. There's something going on, there's shooting going, there are people running everywhere. Now I'm about 5-minute walk or a 2-minute drive from where he was describing. My wife drove me there and I said, look, I'll go and have a look. I started seeing some ambulances and I'm thinking, gee, there might be something in this. And I got out of the car and I said, look, I'll give you, to my wife, I'll give you a yell a bit later. I'll just go and see what's happening. And I walked to the area where I could see a lot of people milling around, but there were people running as well. And I kind of walked in, and that's when I started to see bodies and people running everywhere with medical kits. There were Bondi lifesavers running around. And I could start seeing that there were bodies and people being worked on. And I'd actually lobbed right into a massacre that had just occurred.
With more than 15 dead, Australia is still reeling from the news of a massacre in Paradise. What do we now know about the terrorists behind this horrific attack? Why was a Chanukkah event on Bondi Beach not better protected? And has the Australian government ignored the rising tide of antisemitism in the country? The story today: a terrorist attack on Bondi Beach. Mark, you were just telling us about arriving on the scene on Sunday and the devastation, the sight of a massacre unfolding before you. Take us back a few steps. I mean, you live near Bondi. Just describe the area for people who haven't been. What is Bondi like?
It's beautiful. I've been here 40-odd years and just watched it grow. I mean, I couldn't even swim when I got here and I was an adult. I learned to swim at 34. I had to go into the baby pool and the kick pool. And I just embraced Bondi and I love it. You go down there 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and it's just this calmness. And I've just watched it grow from, being 5 people running along the beach who we thought were lunatics to now to like 250 there doing gym classes on the beach. It's exploded. Since the Olympics, the whole world has discovered Bondi. In Sydney, for some reason, the history of Bondi, it was a working class suburb. And I don't know, when I first moved here, I was able to buy here when no one wanted to live here. And now it's become one of the most popular, expensive areas in Sydney because it's, a wonderful place. It's beautiful and it's 10 minutes from the city. You can be in the heart of Sydney, but you've got this wonderful beach. So, it's a place that I've called home for 40-odd years.
And Mark, take us back to Sunday. What was the event that was taking place?
It was Hanukkah, and I had no idea. There's a lot of Jews in the area. It's well known, the eastern suburbs in Sydney. So there was this Hanukkah festival going on kind of to celebrate the beginning. I didn't even know about that. I had no idea about that. So All I know was I got the phone call telling me there'd been some shooting. And to be honest, at the moment, Sydney's in the middle of a gang war. At first, I thought it was a gangland hit. So first of all, I thought, Christ, this is somebody's been hit at Bondi, which has happened not at Bondi Beach, but Bondi Junction just up the road. There was a major gangland figure who was taken out. And that's what I thought may have happened until I got there. And then I realised that this was something totally different.
And this was a Hanukkah event. Do you have a sense of how many people were attending and their age ranges? And
I've since found out there were probably close to 1,000 people in this area. You know, you got to remember Bondi on a Sunday is packed at any time, and it's just full of different people everywhere. So to have this beginning of the Jewish festival, you know, they had a roped off area. So, but I wasn't aware of it. You know, as I said, you walk down Bondi Beach and you're not surprised to see Latin American dancing or people dressed up as koalas walking around trying to raise money and right, that's the sort of place it is. It's kind of crazy. So when I got there, this is an area next to the Bondi Pavilion, which ironically I was married at, you know, and it's an iconic place. And then that's when I walked into the devastation.
And just describe what you were seeing.
When I first got there, I could see there was a pop-up cinema screen that was frozen. And then I could see this lady running in pink. You know, it's vividly, I know. But earlier I'd spotted a blue and white like towel was over somebody, and I'm going, that person's dead. I can see this is a body. And then this woman running there, howling, and then she's just laid down next to this body and just howling. It was obviously a loved one. From that, I'm taking that in, and I'm seeing people being worked on, a person being worked on at CPR by, I think, by a lifeguard, Bondi lifeguard. And then I started scanning around more, and I could see more people had been covered, and that these were bodies. And that's when the process was, and you're filming. I'm trying to film, and I'm not very good with the phone. And at the time, you're thinking, this is a terrible intrusion. And likewise, you're thinking, I have to record this. The world has to know.
And did you speak to anybody while you were there?
Yeah, I did. First of all, like, when I was taking in all the scene and seeing what I thought was 6 to 8 bodies at least covered, and you could see there were young police officers there who were you could see dazed. Look, they were trying to comprehend, and they're trying to keep people away. Others are trying to get help, and there were medics running, or people running everywhere. Later on, I actually spoke to a man, and he said his name was Barry, and I said, were you there? And he said, yes. He said, I actually had 4 children. I had 2 children and my nephew and nieces I had to look after. He said, and I looked, I could see these gunmen. And he said, I pushed them under a table. And he said, I could just hear these shots ringing out. And I'm thinking, God, it's frightening. But then later, there was a man there, and he was in a uniform. I thought he was an ambulance officer, but he wasn't. He was actually the chaplain for the State Emergency Services, but he was the chaplain at the event, and he had specks of blood everywhere, all over him. And Vlad was his name, and I spoke to him, and then he told me what had happened. He said he was there, then he heard a gunshot, and he said he pushed his son to the ground and lay on top of him. He said, that was just instinctive, thinking. He said, and then a body fell on him, and somebody had been shot. And he said, he thought he heard, maybe 50, 60, 70 shots. He said he thinks it was 5 minutes. He wasn't certain. He said he then got up, and I think he raced his son to safety somewhere. Because the other thing is, Barry told me, he said after all the shooting, he heard shoot her down. And that's when they thought there was a bit of safety. But the chaplain, Vlad, said he looked around and he covered up 13 bodies. He put coverings over them, obviously to try and give them some dignity. There were people everywhere. So his story reverberates very strongly. This man, his instinct called in to save his son, and then his instinct was to cover the dead.
My home was about 20 minutes away from Bondi Beach. I knew that the police had restricted access, so I didn't go over to Bondi till late last night.
Bernard Lagan is the Australia correspondent for The Times, based in Sydney. He's been at Bondi Beach reporting on the massacre that unfolded.
The shooting itself lasted approximately 9 minutes. There's a full-length video on Twitter, and you can hear lots and lots of police sirens and people screaming, but nothing interrupts the shooters for 9 minutes. They keep on firing. And one of them is using a bolt-action rifle, so he has to reload with the bolt after every shot. And the other is using some sort of pump-action weapon, either a rifle or a shotgun, I'm not sure which. And so these things are not like a semi-automatic rifle, which just fires off lots and lots of rounds really quickly. They're quite slow. One of the features of this is when people looked like they were going to approach the concrete footbridge on which these shooters were on, they waved them away. They didn't shoot at bystanders, they waved them away. So it's apparent they were very intent on not wasting their bullets on people who they didn't consider targets. Those bullets were meant for the Jewish community they were firing on, and they wanted to keep it that way.
I mean, it's horrific to realise that. You described the police sirens in the background. What was the police response like? And how soon were they able to call this a terrorist attack?
There were New South Wales police officers at the event before the shooting started. And they were there assisting a Jewish security unit, which was overseeing the Hanukkah celebration. So the police were there from the get-go. Why the police didn't react immediately, or were not seen to react immediately, I do not know. Perhaps they were waiting for backup. I don't know. That is one of the questions that will have to be answered in subsequent inquiries. But pretty soon, within minutes, there was an overwhelming police response.
And Bern, we're speaking just before midday here in London on Monday. It's about 11 p.m. where you are in Sydney. What are the casualties at the time of recording? Because since the news first broke, it does feel like they've been mounting.
Yes, so at the moment there are 16 dead, including one shooter, and approximately 40 people in 6 hospitals around Sydney who have been wounded, some of them very seriously. I might also add that the Prime Minister has said tonight that the surviving shooter is in a coma.
Bern, what do we know so far about the people who carried out this attack?
They were father and son. They were from Western Sydney, far Western Sydney. The son was a bricklayer. I'm not sure what the father did. He came to Australia many years ago and came in on a student visa. So he is not an Australian citizen and never has been. We do know that the son came to the attention of the Australian Security Intelligence Service, that's our main domestic spy agency. He came to their attention back in 2019 because they were investigating an Islamic cell in Western Sydney, and they took an interest in him, but it went no further. We also know that the father and son in November travelled to the Philippines together. That was reported in the Sydney Morning Herald this afternoon, together with the suspicion that the reason they went to the Philippines was to engage with Islamic terrorist groups, or Islamic groups, I should say, in the Philippines. Now, the latter part I can't confirm, but we do know they did go to the Philippines. Their vehicle was found parked at Bondi, a silver hatchback, after the shooting was over, and there were 2 improvised explosive devices inside. There's also a report today, quite a credible report, that an Islamic flag was also found in this car.
Are we able to name the father and son?
Yes, the father is Savad Akram and the son is Nabeed Akram. The father is age 50 and the son is age 24.
And you mentioned that the father seems to have overstayed on a student visa, and yet we're told that he was licensed to carry guns. I mean, just tell us about that. What do we know about how they came to have the weapons they did, and why the government didn't seem to know about them before?
Yes, so you might recall that there was a mass shooting in Australia and Tasmania in 1996. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy. John Howard was the Australian Prime Minister at the time, and he launched gun reform, and Australia ended up with what was said to be the toughest gun laws in the world. The main essence of those gun laws is that it was almost impossible for anyone to have a semi-automatic weapon plus a range of other high-powered weapons. Now, the gun that the father had, the guns that the father had, are commonly used in hunting. They are not semi-automatic weapons. And so they had those. But the important point is that they had 6 guns in the father's name, legally in the father's name, and he was licensed to have those guns. And as there's been a lot of commentary around that since the shooting, how was it or how is it that one person can have 6 guns? And indeed, why would a person who lives in outer suburban Sydney even need 6 guns? So the Anthony Albanese convened a meeting of the National Cabinet tonight to propose further gun law reform, which they've decided to do. And the major changes will be, one, that people will be strictly limited in the number of guns they can possess in the future. And 2, that it's likely that you'll need to be an Australian citizen to obtain a gun license.
And Bern, can you tell us what we know so far about some of the victims of this horrendous attack?
Those who have died are aged between 10 and 87. The youngest is a 10-year-old girl. Her first name is Matilda. She is a schoolgirl from the Gold Coast in Queensland who was visiting Sydney. And I think she was at the festival with her aunt on Sunday. We have a French national, Dan Elkingham. We understand he's around about 40. We have another man, Alex Kleitman. He is 87 and he was a Holocaust survivor. His wife spoke to reporters at a hospital in Sydney late on Sunday night. She was very brave and she came out and said that he really lived for Jewish festivals. He loved them. He was a regular attender at Chanukkah and that they had been together, I think, for 57 years. There was Ali Schlanger. He's age 41 and he was much loved within the Jewish community here. He was born in London and he was described as an always joyful rabbi who cared very much for his community. There was another man called Tiva Weitzen, Weitzen. He is remembered as a sweet grandpa who loved life. He was very involved with his large family, and he died while shielding the longtime friend of his wife who had attended the festival with him. So he was trying to protect someone else when he died.
And Bern, you talked about potentially the slow response of the police on site as the attack was unfolding. At the same time, there were some very brave locals who did take on the attackers. Tell us about that.
There was a man by the name of Ahmed Al-Ahmed. He's 43 years old. He's a Sydney tobacconist. And he was having coffee with a friend in Bondi when the shooting started. This man went toward the shooting and hid behind two parked cars behind the shooters. He was about 20 meters behind the shooters. You can see him watching these two and waiting for an opportunity. And when the older shooter pauses to reload his weapon, Ahmed pounces.
Oh!
And grabs him from behind around the neck with his right hand, and with his left hand he wrestles the gun off the shooter. He is now in hospital and he's quite seriously ill. He was hit by 5 bullets in the hands and arms. 3 of those bullets are still lodged in his body. He's lost a lot of blood, but he is expected to recover.
And we should say, of course, that Ahmed Al-Ahmed is himself a Muslim.
Indeed he is. He came to Australia in 2006 from Syria. And there was a very touching story about this today. His parents have not seen him for almost 20 years. And they finally were allowed to come to Australia only 2 months ago through his efforts. So they were reunited with their son after 20 years, just 2 months ago. And those parents spoke briefly to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation outside the hospital today.
My son is a hero. He served with the police and in the Central Security Forces, and he has the impulse to protect people.
My son has always been brave. He helps people. He's like that.
When he did what he did, he wasn't thinking about the background of the people he's saving. My son is an Australian citizen. He defended the innocent people.
Bern, you mentioned that Anthony Albanese has been talking about gun laws, and there's a real urgency to do something to tighten them up in response to this attack. Many Australian politicians have also been pointing out that perhaps the government has been slow on addressing the other cause of this attack, which is the rising anti-Semitism in Australia. Tell us about that.
Well, there's no question, no doubt that there has been a very, very steep increase in anti-Semitism in Australia since the start of the Gaza war. According to Anthony Albanese's own envoy for anti-Semitism, or for reducing anti-Semitism, reports of anti-Semitism have increased by 316% since the Gaza war began. And it's reflected in the evidence of what we know about the attacks on Jewish property in synagogues in Sydney and Melbourne. There have been a string of fire bombings, arson attacks in Sydney on Jewish businesses such as bakeries, delicatessens, even a small brewery. Cars owned by Jewish people have been smeared in paint, sometimes swastikas, sometimes set alight. In Sydney's eastern suburbs, where there was a large number of the Jewish community live. In Melbourne, at least 2 synagogues have been attacked. One was firebombed while people were preparing to worship. That was a very serious situation. And there was a synagogue here in Sydney, which was attacked earlier this year as well. So the Jewish community have been expressing alarm for some time at these mounting attacks on their property and this harassment. And they have been warning that this could escalate. Now, to be fair to the government, it has increased by a large amount funding for the security agencies, such as ASIO, the intelligence services, and other security agencies, since the beginning of the Gaza war. So they certainly have heeded the warnings of the Director General of Security that anti-Semitism is a rising concern for Australia's security agency. The deeper criticism from the Jewish community is that the government has encouraged anti-Semitism in its tolerance for pro-Palestinian protests in Australia, and by also ultimately recognising Palestine as a state earlier this year. So that is the criticism that many make, including Alexander Downer in The Times this afternoon.
Mark, you've covered crime for years, and suddenly there's a massacre on your doorstep. You've lived in Bondi for years. You've watched it change. It's where you got married. It's where you've set up your entire family. It's where you've lived. You wrote a piece over the weekend with the headline, "My beloved Bondi became a war zone." Do you think this will change it forever?
For generations, until it's bred out the memories. As I said, I remember about 11 o'clock at night, I looked, and it's Campbell Parade's the main drag, and it was just a sea of red and blue lights. And I just realised that Bondi Beach was a crime scene. It wasn't a beach. Sorry. Yeah. And I suppose it does affect you. And I remember walking home, because I was that close. I was walking home, and you could see people just in disbelief through the back streets of Bondi, which is away from where all the mayhem had happened. It'll come back. It'll be its beautiful place again. Maybe not for me. Maybe not for a whole lot of people who were there that night. But yeah, I'm hoping there'll be all these little toddlers that'll be down there. You go down to Bondi Beach. I used to go down there in the worst mood. I'd wake up and thinking I've got to go in there, fight with the boss and fight with the cops and fight with the lawyers. And I'd see these kids running around, and you'd go, you know what? The world ain't a bad place. And they'll be there. They'll be there tomorrow. And hopefully they won't be infected by this hatred that we saw. So yeah, it will recover, and hopefully there'll be a whole generation that'll see Bondi again.
That was the crime reporter Mark Morri, and before that, the Times Australia correspondent Bernard Lagan. The producers today were Taryn, Siegel and Micaela Arneson. The executive producer was Tim Walklate. Sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.